Hello Year 5 and welcome to your last English lesson for our newspaper reports. So well done for getting this far. We spent 3 very long weeks having a go at writing and looking at all the different features of our newspapers to get to this end point. So today, to finish it off, we're going to go back and accurately punctuate reported and direct speech. Now, we looked at this when we did our speech burgers back in our first week of learning. So your success criteria for today, so what you need to be able to achieve by the end of the day is to be able to identify the difference between direct and reported speech in writing. You then need to make sure that you know how to recognise where inverted commas are needed when we're punctuating direct speech. We're going to see if you can have a go at changing direct speech into reported speech and vice versa, to see if you can do the opposite for both. And then by the end of the lesson, you're going to have a go at creating examples of direct and reported speech yourselves. And this is going to be based on our character descriptions that we wrote from yesterday. So let's have a look at the difference between writing reported speech and direct speech, okay? So within speech, we know there's 2 ways of doing it. We have our direct and indirect speech. Now, we call it reported speech, but it's the same as indirect. When you're directly saying something, you're saying it to someone. When it's indirect, it's not being spoken to, it's fed back. Okay, so if we had this quote here from Iggy, so I bid you farewell, earthlings. So if we were going to write this in the way he'd spoken, we'd write it like this. So I bid you farewell, earthlings, shouted Iggy from his spaceship. Okay, and now we can see we've got our correct punctuation and our opening speech phrase. But if we were going to write it in indirect speech or reported speech, we would write it like this. From his spaceship, comma, Iggy bid farewell to the earthlings. So we're now more paraphrasing what he said rather than the physical words that Iggy said. So that's the difference between the 2 types of speech. So look carefully at this sentence. What do you notice? So pause the video and have a read and think, well, what do you notice in that sentence? Okay, well, here we can see we've got the exact words. So this is the quote. So this is the spoken words that Iggy has said, and you can see here that it's enclosed in inverted commas. Okay, so we have our speech marks. Okay, here we have the direct speech. We have the exact words that's been said, but the order of the words that was said here in our speech bubble has not changed. So the order is exactly the same. And then at the end, we've got the correct punctuation. So we know it can either be a comma, an exclamation mark, or a question mark. Okay, we know it can't be a full stop because we're not at the end of our sentence because we still have our reported clause to complete. And then we have our reporting clause at the end. Again, this is to explain how the speech was said, again, who said the speech. Now, sometimes it can be extended with an adverb or subordinate clause or prepositional phrase, which we'll look at today. Okay, and sometimes it can appear either at the beginning or it can appear after the speech has been spoken. So you've got the exact words enclosed in your speech marks. You've got your direct quote written in the same order. You've then got your closing punctuation mark and then your reporting clause to finish. So let's take a look at some of the reported speech sentences. Okay, so how is it different in a speech sentence? So here we've got, from his spaceship, Iggy bid farewell to the earthlings. So here what we've done is we now have the indirect speech. Okay, so there's no inverted commas. We don't have our speech marks when it is a reported sentence. And here we have the actual words, but you might notice that we've changed the order a little bit because it has to be in the correct tense. Okay, so rather than saying I bid you farewell, earthlings, we've changed it to Iggy. So we've changed the pronoun because we can't say from his spaceship I bid farewell to the earthlings because you're reporting this. So somebody else is explaining this to you. So we have to change our pronoun from I to Iggy. And sometimes the words might need to be changed around or added to make sure the tense is correct. So I bid you farewell, earthlings. It's Iggy bid farewell to the earthlings. We've had to add those 2 words in there to make sure the sentence makes sense. Okay. Now we don't have a reported clause, okay, of how he said it, okay, but we could use an adverb or a prepositional phrase to explain how. So that can be added in if need be. So let's have a look at some examples then. Let's see if you know how to do this. So here is the sentence here. If there are examples of direct speech, where would your inverted commas go? So you need to first identify, is it direct or reported speech? And if it's direct speech, where are my punctuations going to go? So pause the video and have a think. Okay, well, this is an example of indirect speech. Okay, we don't have we have Kayla explained at the beginning. So we have our reported clause at the beginning, but because we've used the pronouns of she rather than I, we know that this isn't spoken language, okay? Therefore, it's reporting and doesn't require any direct commas. Let's have a look at this one then. So watch out, screamed George as he launched his frisbee. So pause the video and have a think. Is this direct or indirect speech? And if it's direct speech, where might my punctuation need to go? Okay, so this is an example of direct speech. Okay, our reporting clause here said screamed George. So that's explaining how the speech was spoken, which means that watch out must be the spoken speech that George had said. So we need to have inverted commas. But where am I going to put them? Okay. So using my speech burger, I have my open speech marks, my open inverted commas, my capital letter. I then have my spoken speech, I have my punctuation, and then I have my closing speech marks. Well done if you remembered that in the correct order. I'm going to test you one more time, okay? Guthrum announced that they should charge towards the village. Pause the video. Is it direct or reported speech? And if it's direct, where's my punctuation going to go? Okay, so we started with the reporting clause, okay? Guthrum announced. It's an example of indirect speech. Therefore, we don't need any speech marks. What about this one then? I'm going to test you more. The doctor gently said, open your mouth as wide as possible. So pause the video. Is it direct or reported speech? And if it's direct, where might my punctuation go? Okay, so this was a sneaky one, okay? We swapped our reporting clause and our speech round, but we know that it's still speech, okay, because it says the doctor gently said, and that's going to be the speech, the spoken words that the doctor says. So where's my punctuation going to go? Okay, well, let's try it out then. So I'm going to put my comma here. I've got my open speech marks, my capital letter, I've got my spoken words, I've got a full stop, and I've got my closed speech marks. I've got all 5 of my elements that I need to include. Well done if you spotted those in the correct place. So you have a copy of this newspaper report at home for you to have a look at. Equally, if you can see it well enough on the screen, there's a copy for you to see here. What I want you to do is, can you spot an example of direct speech in this newspaper report? So pause the video, and what I want you to do, rather than reading the whole report, I want you to scan the report, because we know when it's direct speech, we're looking for speech marks. So pause the video and quickly scan over your work and see, can you find any of the paragraphs that contain speech marks? Oh, well done. Okay, so there is a passage here that's written in direct speech. Okay, it's got the inverted commas. Okay, it has the reporting clause at the end, and it has the correct punctuation. So that's one of our examples in our newspaper report of where we've used direct speech. Now, the more difficult challenge, because this is harder to identify, do you think you can now spot an example of indirect speech? Now, I'll give you a clue. When we write our reporting clauses and we have witness statements, they tend to go towards the end of our newspaper report. So it might be after the example of direct speech. So pause the video and see if you can find it. Okay, well done if you found it. It's just here. So admitting disappointment at missing out on the team, Justin Gatlin promised supporters that the team had given it their all. Had that been the other way around, it would have said Justin Gatlin said, I promise that we've given it our all. Okay, so that's an example of reporting our clause because it tells the reader what Justin Gatlin promised rather than the spoken words he said. So well done if you managed to identify those in your report. So today you're going to have a go at writing your own version. So I'm going to now model an example. Now that you've been able to identify them, we're going to write 2 of our own paragraphs today. So this is a copy of my next 2 statements. I'm going to move me up here so you can see my speech burger at the bottom to help you. So this is the speech burger we looked at in week 1. Okay, and this is used for our direct speech. So we've got to remember, we've got our open speech marks, we've got our capital letter, the spoken sentence, the punctuation, and then our closed speech marks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video and I'd just like you to read the 2 paragraphs I've written. See if you think you can identify where I've used my reported speech and my direct speech. So pause the video and have a quick read. Okay, so I'm going to go through it with you. Now I've been a little bit sneaky because I've added some additional clauses. So rather than going directly into my direct and indirect speech, I've added a little bit more additional information to make sure that my paragraphs flow. So remember our cohesiveness lesson, where we're looking at our fronted adverbials, we've got our prepositions and our conjunctions. We can also include our clauses. So we need to make sure our paragraphs flow. So I'm going to use some of the information that I included in some of my previous work this week. Now your character descriptions from yesterday might help you with this. So we have a look at the beginning. So we've got a rather perplexed Mr. Cunningham, who is one of the residents. Now here, this links back to yesterday's lesson. I've included a relative clause. Okay, now I know that it's a relative clause because I've got my 2 commas in here, but I've also started with who. So although it's an embedded clause, it starts with a relative pronoun. So that's my who, my what, my which, my whose, my that, and my they. Okay. So a rather perplexed Mr. Cunningham, who is one of the residents, stated that this event was unlike any other he had witnessed. He told the Sutton Herald. So I've got the stated that this event was unlike any other he'd witnessed. So that is an example there of my reported speech. I haven't explained in words what he said, but I've reported back to you as the reader what it was that he told the newspaper. So then I'm going to have a go at using some direct speech. So he told the Sutton Herald, I've got my punctuation, got my capital letter. You should have seen that sky that evening. They were just floating there on giant lily pads and flew right past my window. So there I've got my reporting speech. I've then got my closing punctuation marks, but I'm going to continue on with my statements. This is where I've been sneaking. I've split it in half. So I've then got my open punctuation marks again. I'm going to carry on. It was the strangest yet most incredible thing I'd ever seen. Now, I don't need my reporting clause at the end because I did it in the middle of my sentence, okay? So you can think about the order that you write it in today. He was one of many residents last night who witnessed this unusual phenomenon. Phenomenon. Well, that's a very difficult word. It's a bit of a tongue twister. So that's some additional information that's now going to help flow into my next paragraph that's going to be about my other character. So Mr. Cunningham has an example of reported and direct speech. So now I'm going to do the same for one of my other characters. I'm going to focus on Mrs. Watson, who is the elderly lady in her living room. So not everyone was so lucky as Mrs. Watson, an elderly lady who lived next door to Mr. Cunningham. Okay, so again, I've included another relative clause in here because I've got the who lived next door to Mr. Cunningham. Now I've got my reporting clause here of exclaimed and I can see speech marks. So I know I'm about to go into my direct speech, okay? Now I realised there I actually missed that comma out at the end of my report, at the end of my relative clause, so make sure you include that. So they trashed my entire living room. They smeared slime all over my lovely sofa and left dripping wet slimy lily pads all over my house. She was very unfortunate. Now, at the end of that bit there, that's my entire reporting clause, my entire direct speech there. I've also then got my closing speech marks. So I've had a go at writing direct speech. So now I'm going to move on and add some reporting speech. So she was very unfortunate as she was rushed to hospital this morning with a broken hip due to slipping on a lily pad just outside her front door. So now I've given a little bit of extra information to give context as to why she's so upset. And this is going to lead into the quote now that I'm going to report. So she told the Herald that she wants compensation for the upheaval this invasion has caused her. So the bit where it says she told the Herald that's my reported part of my sentence. That's the reported clause, but there's no speech. So I've had to paraphrase and report back to the reader what it was that she said. So there you can see I've got two paragraphs. Each paragraph contains one piece of directed speech and one example of reported speech. I've also included a relative clause and I've also included some vocabulary, okay, that I have done and looked at throughout the week as we've looked on. And I've also included some background information about my characters to help lead into those examples. So what you're going to do today is you're going to need to write one paragraph for each of your chosen characters from yesterday's description work, okay? And in each paragraph, you're going to do exactly what I did. You're going to give one example containing direct speech and an example of reported speech. Now, you need to make sure that you use the correct speech for your direct speech. So make sure you're using the punctuation to help you with those paragraphs. But have a go at including some relative clauses if you can. And you can base those relative clauses on some of the description work you looked at yesterday. So if you know that you're doing the elderly lady, you might say give her a name. So I picked Mrs. Watson. It could be Mrs. Watson, comma, who was a very elderly lady who lived next door, comma, told the Sutton Herald, open speech marks, and then go into your speech. Okay, so use the information that you worked on yesterday because that will help you give a bit of background information. So have a go at writing your reported speech, and I look forward to then having a look at that work when we send it in to complete our 3-week unit of newspaper reports. So have a go, enjoy it, because it's the last lesson we'll do for newspapers, and then next week we're going to start something very new and very exciting. Okay, good luck, Year 5.